Okay, I started recording now because maybe this part might be relevant for the protocol. So why does he, in the text, how does he explain, and why should we? I mean, the idea here is that Descartes does that, but that's not because Descartes is a peculiar individual, etc. But Descartes represents a way of thinking. Why do we doubt mathematical propositions at this point in the meditation, as opposed to we already doubt the veracity of perception? Go ahead.
At least to me, the way that we've created mathematics, it is a construct of what we believe certain things to be in our mind. I think everything comes like it comes full circle back to the mind. So I don't, at least what I've perceived from what Descartes is talking about is that we doubt it because it is a construct of our mind. And so that leaves room for doubt.
Okay. That is in general true. That is in principle true. But there might be something more specific as well. You're right. That's our construct. But do you really doubt that the construct, your mind, 2 plus 2, are you going to one day in the universe find two things that are added to other things are going to yield to 5 things? Is that going to happen? I mean, is that a reasonable expectation that, yes, it is purely the construct of my mind, I might say, but it so happens this pure construction of my mind fits perfectly with the external world. Does it not? How can I doubt that?
Well, I think one thing is that, like, yes, like arithmetic and math and all of that like goes on in your head, but it does have a very strong connection to the world in like the way that 2 pens plus 2 pens equals 4 pens. And so if Descartes is going to go and question all of his senses, then like some of his senses do have a relationship to math, not in as much of a way as his brain does, but in an indirect way maybe. And so through that connection, he has to question them a little bit if he's going to question his perceptions.
Good creative way of thinking. I like it. Let's just pause for a second. Maybe I was a little misleading in terms of giving the example of pens. So regardless of pens, books, everything in the world or in the universe, 2 plus 2 is going to be 4. It is, for in Descartes' mind, mathematics of the simplest things. It's geometry, it's arithmetic. These are concerned with simplest things. Therefore, they can never be empirically, in terms of senses, they can never be empirically demonstrated to be false. So he wants to separate that from the senses. To the extent that we grant this to him, he wants to separate it. And it is extremely important because today, modern science, I would argue, predominantly based on calculation, arithmetic, mathematics, more sophisticated, obviously, mathematics than perception. So certain things that we will never observe. We will never observe, for example, the beginning of the universe, if there is such a thing. So if science were merely empirical, you would say, so I want to see this Big Bang, like show it to me. How did it happen? You just have to go 13, 14, however many billions years back in the past and look at it. No, what do? They do calculations, like how many times, I don't even know what they are doing. So, but it is mostly mathematical calculations. But that is something special about mathematics that is completely separate than empirical observation. By empirical, I mean observation through the senses. Now, he starts talking about God all of a sudden. Like, let me share that in a second too. So he says, hence it seemed to be that this highlighted session, before we come to that, I'm sorry, just a second, somewhere here. So after I read that section, the suspicion of being false, right? So that's what I read, marginal number 21. Be that as it may, there is fixed in my mind a certain opinion of long-standing, namely that there exists a God who is able to do anything by whom I, such as I am, have been created. Now, why does he suddenly start talking about God? We were in the middle of discussing the distinction between mathematical propositions as opposed to empirical propositions. Why is he discussing God all of a sudden? And God created me. Any ideas? Go ahead.
In the absence of God, he questions mathematics because he feels like his mind could be altered or like shift. I don't know how to describe that, but that's what I got. That in the absence of God, that he questions mathematics. Yeah, he didn't. I don't know, that confused me. I don't know.
Okay, no, good. I mean, it is a little confusing, but you are on the right track. I think that's the idea. No, I don't want you to get the impression that what he is talking about here as God is actually God. It is not actually like the Christian God or some kind of a God. It is a theoretical construct, namely us as created by God have a mind, and that mind has very simple, basic truths expressed through mathematics. And we also trust the fact that these mathematical constructs in our minds actually correspond to the structure of the world. So in a way, we are created in a basically okay fashion. We are created such that our thinking somehow corresponds to the world, and we can trust that. Now he's going to question that, but he cannot do that with a good God, because a good God would not create us in a completely wrong fashion. And now again, this is not a theological view. It is partially expressed in theology, but it's not a theological view. This is basically a philosophical view that the way we think somehow has some bearing, some reflection in reality. And if I want to doubt that, I cannot do that through God, because God, by definition, all good, and God is not a matrix. God didn't create us in a fashion that we are always completely wrong. So what does he do? God is good. So
He makes God evil for a minute, or pretends.
Well, since that is impossible, he says, okay, let's just assume that God is not deceiving us. Let's assume an evil genius is deceiving us. So let me again find that section here on page 62. Accordingly, I suppose not a supremely good God, the source of truth, which is the source of truth, but rather an evil genius, supremely powerful and clever, who has directed his entire effort at deceiving me. So admittedly, this is a hyperbolic kind of claim, in the sense that imagine an evil genius as powerful as God, whose entire mission is to completely deceive us. Now, that's a little bit fantastic, but philosophically what he's trying to get at is imagine ourselves to be completely mismatched with the universe. Imagine that we are a cosmic mistake, which actually is not far-fetched. Like human beings might be something that should not have existed in the universe. We are like some organic mistake. I don't know like why it happened. There is really no justification for it. It's completely, I mean, you know, I mean, animals too, like we are animals, obviously, but like this organic thing, given that as much as we know, life as we know it, organically doesn't exist in our immediate surroundings. Perhaps our perception of the universe would be completely different if we were just sort of waving flags to people on the moon and the Mars, etc. We had some kind of galactic community, but it seems like we are completely cut off from any other life form. So we might be mistake, even if we are mistake, even if our existence has absolutely no meaning, and beyond meaning, like theological, religious meaning, there is even no sort of physical cosmic meaning. We are just the way we are, and we think certain things, and our like know certain things to be true, and that mathematics, even though appears to be corresponding to the world around us, might be completely wrong. 2 plus 2 is not 4. In fact, it's already shown that the inner angles of a triangle is only 180 in a Euclidean geometry. There is also non-Euclidean geometry, as some of you know, that in which you can't say it's 180, you can say 179.999 or something like that. So he entertains this possibility. So it is not like actually something that he believes. It's not something that he sort of fantasizes, etc. Even mathematical propositions might be completely wrong. Evil genius is deceiving us. And he reaches the certainty of doubt, I think, therefore I am, after entertaining the possibility of an evil genius. Even if there's an evil genius, even in other words, we have complete deception, complete and total deception. Some other French philosophers call this like this ultimate madness, like everything is like beyond matrix, because we even understand the structure of matrix if you watch the movie. This is a matrix that we can't even understand. We can't even identify it as matrix. It's completely wrong. It's completely deceptive, completely doubtful. And even if that is the case, he says, I think, therefore I am. So this is important because this replaces the certainty of I for the certainty of God, certainty of religion, certainty of belief. I think, and my truth, the fact that I think, not what I think, but the fact that I think, that truth is more fundamental prior to the truth of God. Now, he does recuperate God. He does prove the existence of God. We are going to read that for next time. That's going to be our last class on the card on Thursday. This is your assignment, by the way, for Thursday, meditation 3. So he is going to talk about how I have a clear and distinct idea of God, and God must be the cause of that idea, therefore God exists, etc. We'll discuss the details of that argument. But what he is trying to get at there is to show that I can actually recuperate an aspect of my knowledge, which is mathematics, even if there is a all-powerful, all-magnanimous, all-knowing God who created me. God didn't really create me perfectly. I make mistakes. My senses, my perception can never be trusted, should not be trusted. And that belief becomes the foundation of modern science. Because the more we can calculate, the more we can produce precision with respect to our knowledge through mathematical proposition, the more we are certain about that knowledge, and never with respect to our perception. So I gave you examples in the previous class about all our perceptions that we still continue to have being completely wrong from a scientific perspective. You do not observe the world, you do not process the world, you do not perceive the world the way it is. And we know that we trust the science and its findings and its calculations and its findings and other, discoveries more than our perception. Much, not even comparison. Is that clear? Why modern science is going to be fundamentally. Now, I want to discuss a little bit, well, anyway, are there any questions? So please read meditation 3 for Thursday, and then we'll have a better sense of what he accomplishes as the foundation of modern science. Also, we'll discuss the end of meditation 2 either today if we have time, or maybe let's go into that now. Okay, so after the entertaining the possibility of evil genius, which is still a possibility, he says, even if there's a being, a supremely powerful evil genius trying to deceive me, which translation, in other words, even if everything that I think about the world might be wrong or doubtful, I can still say, I think, therefore I exist. And I exist only as a process of doubt. It's not that I can know anything that I doubt, the content, but I cannot doubt the fact that I am in the process of doubting, because that would be a self-fulfilling activity. Even if I doubt that I doubt, I am certain that I'm doubting. Even if I claim that everything is wrong, I still cannot say, I can still say, the fact that I think everything is wrong is a fact. I cannot, so in other words, this circular argument that folds onto itself, namely, I doubt. Now he says, how long can I be certain that I exist when I'm not thinking? Well, of course, that's a really interesting question, because we think that we always think. Therefore, we actually think much more than we allow ourselves to think. Sometimes people say, like, you are thinking too much, as if that's a possibility. Like, you think too much. Don't think. Like, even if somebody tells you, like, don't think that, that's just like a really open invitation to thinking, like, because you heard the word, what else are you going to do? But he says, our perceptions are also processes of thinking. Now, I think that I see a piece of paper in front of me. It might be completely questionable whether there is a paper in front of me. But it is not questionable, for me at least, that I think that there is a paper in front of me. So the fact that I'm thinking is different than what I'm thinking. Therefore, whenever I have perception, even if all my perceptions about the external world might be completely wrong, I still think that whatever they are telling me, that thinking is correct. So I'm still thinking. Now, what does that prove? It doesn't prove anything about what I perceive. It doesn't prove that there is a paper in front of me at all. It just proves that I'm thinking. It proves to me that I'm thinking. So, yet, it is also possible that at some point you are not going to think. So he gives this extended example of wax, a piece of wax. It has been honeycomb wax, and he is sort of looking. Now, I'm observing this object, and it is through perception, right? So it changes color, it changes shape, it changes maybe square to becomes triangular, etc. And yet, I do claim that it is the same piece of wax, right? Even though all my perceptual content regarding the wax has changed, I still think it's the same wax. Why? Why do I think it's the same wax? Given that you are not going to trust anything about your senses. Why do I still think it's the same wax? Or is it true that it is the same wax? Anybody who wants to say something wrong? Which is perfectly fine. Why do I think it's the same wax? Should I think it's the same wax? Have you ever had that experience? Like if you have, as I did, grow up at the time of electrical blackouts, etc. So we used to have a candle in the house, and it burns like it goes away. And I play with the wax, which is kind of nice. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a good pastime. So it changes shape and, you know, and then you say, well, and it's gone, it's disappeared. And imagine like there's a candle here. You go outside and come back 5 minutes later, and it's half the size, different color, more darker, etc., burned through. Will you say that it's the same wax, and can you be sure of that?
I mean, I would say it would be the same. It's just like in a different form to the state that it was in compared to now.
Well, how do you know that somebody hasn't replaced it with another piece of candle when you were gone?
I don't know, just blind faith, I guess.
I mean, you can't be sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you are just simply looking at it without like leaving the room, like constantly looking at it, like never losing sight of the candle, can you say that then? Are you more likely to say it? Yeah.
Yeah, I would most likely say that just for the fact that I watched it in this sense.
So what does that prove for Descartes?
Does it prove that you have to like actually see it to happen for it to be the real thing versus like just?
Okay. Let me ask you this. Does that prove for Descartes that the piece of wax exists? Be very careful now. You've been reading Descartes for 5 pages now. Well, more than that, but does it prove, as a result of this experiment or whatever with the wax? Does it?
Say no.
You will be right. Of course no. What does it prove? I think he's like designing experiments for you. What can it prove? What does it prove when I'm observing this piece of wax, or Descartes is observing this piece of wax, and it is changing shape, color, and I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, oh, this looks like the same piece of wax, but it is different now. What does that prove?
It might be just like playing with words, but like the fact that he thinks that he sees wax does not change over time.
Or changed.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that prove? That's not playing with words. That's pretty cool. So what does it prove?
That he thinks that there is a wax.
Which would be wrong.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
He shouldn't think that.
Yeah.
But what does he know? What does he think? Okay, this is not a Socratic questioning. I know it's kind of annoying, but there's a really cool answer as a result of this, so bear with me. So what does it prove? That I think that that's the same piece of wax throughout this whole process of empirical changes.
I'm looking at the top of page 68, and he talks about, it remains then for me to concede that I do not grasp what this wax is through the imagination, rather I perceive it in my own. So it's something that only really exists in his mind, and his, like Isa was saying, like the only thing he knows for sure is that he sees, that he thinks the wax is changing, but he doesn't know.
Okay. What happens when he thinks? As long as he thinks. It's the same, it's the principle. You wrote it in your protocol.
Wait, can you repeat what happens when he thinks?
Uh-huh.
He thinks. And so he thinks, therefore he is.
Uh-huh. Yes. So from all this process about this wax has nothing to do with the wax, because if you look at page 69, which I can share with you, page 69, okay, 63, 64. But here, oops, too much. Come back. Sorry. Just 1 second. We are coming to, okay, the top of page 69. But what am I to say about this mind that is about myself? For as yet, I admit nothing else to be in me over and about the mind. What I ask, am I who seem to perceive this fact so distinctly? Do I not know myself not only much more truly and with great certainty, but also much more distinctly and evidently? For if I judge that the wax exists from the fact that I see it, certainly from this same fact that I see the wax, it follows much more evidently that I myself exist. For it could happen that what I see is not truly a wax. It could happen that I have no eyes with which to see anything. But it is utterly impossible that while I see or think I see, I do not now distinguish these two, right? I, who think, am not something. Likewise, who think am, not something. Likewise, if I judge that the wax exists from the fact that I touch it, the same outcome will again obtain, namely that I exist. If I judge that the wax exists from the fact that I imagine it or any other reason, plainly the same thing follows. So when I think other things exist, that doesn't at all prove that those things exist. It only proves that I exist. So if I follow the wax through all these changes, the only thing that I'm certain about is the fact that I am thinking throughout this process. It says nothing about the wax itself. So it might be completely wrong. I might not even have eyes, he says. Like, okay. So there might not be a wax. That's all about the external world and perception. The only thing that I'm sure of is the fact that I'm thinking. That I'm in the process of thinking, therefore I am. I exist as a thinking process. I mean, he says I'm a thinking thing later on, but at this point, it is just thinking process. Okay, does that make sense? So the wax only proves that he exists. It has nothing to do with the wax. Then he continues to show the only thing that I'm certain about is this. Then I need to prove that somehow my knowledge, quote unquote, knowledge about the external world through mathematics is possible. And in order to do that, in order to have the certainty of mathematical propositions, he needs to prove the existence of God. Now, of course, this is not, again, an theological proof in the sense that nobody is going to, I mean, at least I wasn't, but nobody is going to be like, oh, Descartes so clearly proves the existence of God, so we should all believe now, or we should all believe in God, etc. That's really not the point. The point is, again, very kind of almost, I mean, it is definitely theoretical, but it's sort of pragmatic. Like, I have to show that I'm created. My mind is created in such a way that its understanding of the world through mathematics is reliable. Now, this is, again, you might consider this as a question of faith, but this is a faith that is not theological. This is a faith that even exists in scientific activity. Like when I make certain calculations, I believe at some very fundamental level that this corresponds to the actual structure of the universe. And that is a certainty, that's a leap that Descartes shows that that's our belief in God, not some being that exists over there, but our relationship to the universe, our relationship to cosmos and the world is reliable. So God here represents a kind of, I don't want to say safety, but kind of comprehensibility of the universe. Science operates with the assumption that there is something to be known. There is a structure, there is a reason, there is a cause. Ultimately, in the universe, there is something that can be revealed to human mind. That's a question of faith, because it is possible that you must operate as a scientist, that everything you do, including all your calculations, all your mathematical formulas, etc., are completely wrong. And that's a very important, so people make fun of Descartes and say, oh, you are still like religious, you are still proving the existence of God. It's not that simple. It's not that simple at all. In fact, for Descartes, the proof for the existence of God, which he probably doesn't even himself believe, is really proof for the reliability of knowledge with respect to the external world. And since he is going to prove God in his mind or in his theoretical construct, he is going to remove the possibility of an evil genius. And once the possibility of evil genius is removed, the only thing that is recuperated is the mathematical proposition. We are still imperfect. In fact, our perception of the world is still not reliable, even if there is a perfect God. We still make mistakes. We still cannot base science on observations. Now, this is an issue that I want to discuss because we seem to be living in a kind of schizophrenic world where we value each person's experience almost religiously. We say, that's my experience, that's my special experience, and you need to respect that. You somehow base your knowledge of the world on that experience. And we relate to each other with respect to utter respect for that experience. Your experience is unique, it's equally valid, it's wonderful, you should keep it, you should derive your knowledge from that. While at the same time, we are operating with a worldview in which individual experience actually counts for nothing in the understanding of the universe. To the extent that even experience as such is not reliable at all. And that's a kind of interesting, I call sort of split, because we are so invalidated as human beings in our experience that everything that we experience might be wrong. And even, and especially, our own interpretation of our experience might be completely wrong. Yet, in public discourse, we want to sort of keep that going I guess it's also a humanistic tradition in which you need to value and respect the individual experience. But in science, and sometimes we see the absurdity of the situation. And my favorite example I gave you once, there's this in the Congress, no, it was, or in the it's either in the Congress or Senate, this senator or a representative comes to the, I gave you this example before, comes to the floor with a snowball. I said, this is my experience. It's cold, it's snowing. Hence, climate change is a hoax. And you see that's absurd, right? From a scientific perspective. But that's his experience. I mean, of course, he might be cynical. He is making a political point. I don't even think that he believes his own experience, etc. But what if he does? What if we believe that our experience is completely invalidating everything else? And we somehow have this insurmountable interpretation of experience. We, as human beings, kind of exclude each other from our experiences. We have no interest in sharing our experiences. We want to be the masters of our experiences. I am the master of my experience. I know my experience the best. I interpret my experience the best. Therefore, no one can know what I know. That's sort of like a property, you know, like it's mine. Nobody can drink my water and nobody can have my experience. And why is that? Why do we rely on our experience so much, whereas our entire worldview is really based on the exclusion of human experience for scientific knowledge? So I think they go hand in hand a little bit, because like we are so depleted of our experience in terms of legitimacy, we are kind of clinging to it almost religiously. And I'm sure you are experiencing that. You are experiencing that in your perception of the public discourse. Like we really have this private property approach of our experience. It's mine. And no one can own it, no one can understand it. It's mine. Yet, you should never base anything on your experience, because precisely because it is so special, maybe, it will bear no truth for any other thing. Any thoughts, any ideas, any questions, any contestations? Objections?
I think that with the congressman or senator example, like something that I immediately think of is that like the person does not understand that a snowball is not adequate proof that climate change doesn't exist, because he hasn't probably taken the time to understand the ins and outs of the understanding of this
Sure.
Area of research. And I feel like that speaks directly to the way in which, like, in our society, if you're not a scientist, you don't understand how things work. And so you have, most of the time, if you don't believe in something scientific, it's because you haven't been given the guidelines of what it is, like what climate change actually means, for example. And so I think that speaks to like the relationship that our society has to science, and that like it's kind of this like thing that's up here that I'm a normal person of science, I will never understand.
Sure.
And then that means that oftentimes, if we don't have a connection to it, it's I lost my train of thought, but I don't know. I think it's an interesting relationship.
So far it was great, because that's precisely our assumption. That's precisely the point. But what would you say? I mean, I'm not saying this, so I'm performing this as a sort of experiment. You know, statistically, you are making a big deal out of COVID. It only affects 5% of people. People are already dying anyway. Calculation-wise, it's really not big of a deal. Even if you get COVID, 99% of them are mild. It's only 1%. This is a statistical, mathematical, almost scientific fact that it's not a big deal. Then you will say, but how can you say that? I lost someone who was very close and dear to me. You are invalidating my experience by appealing to this scientific fact. You are not respecting the individuality of this. Then the question becomes, you are asking me to behave in this schizophrenic way. You want me, on the one hand, educate myself in science, and ever since, to be perfectly honest, I'm like reading statistics from the beginning of this whole thing. That's the only thing that gives me comfort. And it is true that if someone that you love might have it, and you might suffer as a result of that, and that's an experience, and you should respect individuals. But that doesn't say anything about the virus itself. That's your individual experience but that doesn't conclude anything scientific. So I read Worldometer all the time, and it's like so many cases, so many deaths, so many people, etc. And I sort of like, it was 19%, then I went back down to 5%. I was like, okay, that's good. We are learning, it's a process. Now you take a global, I mean, it's really global perspective to the pandemic, which sometimes invalidates individual experiences. So that's the tension that we are living with, because people will say, oh, don't like give me scientific explanations. I have this experience and that's very valid. Not to mention, you really interpret your experience correctly either. And that's another aspect that comes from Descartes. Namely, I think I'm seeing a wax. And Descartes is telling me what you perceive is not correct necessarily. You might be wrong about this. You might come to completely wrong conclusions from your unique experience. And you see a lot of people do that. Who does that? People who somehow try to give some justification for their prejudices. They say, oh, I interacted with Turks. They all appeared to be this way so far. That's my experience. You say, no, that's not, but that's my experience. I talked, I mean, you know, people say that. I know a lot of them. Therefore, I can make a sort of inference. I can say, I met like 10 Turks. They all are like crazy. So therefore, Turks are crazy. And you say, no, Turks are not crazy. But it's my experience. I had 10. How many did you have? I said, I don't have to have experience with Turks to know that you cannot conclude anything from 10 people or 100 or 1,000 actually. Your experience, you might have it, but doesn't entitle to you to make claims. Or they can just say, no, I'm not really making any claims about the Turks. I just don't like them. That's based on my experience. I just don't like them. I saw 10 of them. I decide I don't like, I'm not making any, you know, generalizations. I just don't like them. Then I would say you are the victim of your own experience. Your experience and your interpretation of your own experience makes you bigoted. So either try to have more experiences with other Turks, or interpret experience correctly and don't base your judgments on your experience. So you need to know how you can judge that experience, and you should not really rely on it. Yes, you might have seen 10, 100, 200 Turks that behave in the same way, but you should not make even personal judgments, let alone cultural stereotypes. And when we do this positively, then everything is fine. Like, I mean, I'm sure both as Americans abroad, but also as international students in the United States, it's like, oh, I love Italians, or I love like people from Ghana. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? You saw maybe like 5 people, and on the basis of that, you are coming up with 5 positive experiences, and then I like them. It's like, that in and of itself is wrong, like regardless of your experience. Just name them. How many people from Italy, like I like, I don't know, whatever a stereotypical Italian name. I like her, them, not Italian. And even your experience of liking someone changes too. So I get very uneasy when people legitimize their own experiences. And claim some kind of knowledge as a result of that. We need to be more modest with respect to our experience. Like believing that you come to Earlham, interact with 1,000 people from all around the world, that you are gaining a global perspective. That's also a prejudice. That's also glorifying our experience here as having any kind of meaning beyond itself. But it's positive and we love each other, so it's okay. So as you read the card, as you engage in this theoretical, philosophical reflection, there are really multiple ways in which you can think of these as relating to your immediate existence. I mean, that's what I love about it, obviously. That's why one studies philosophy, because it really allows you to make sense of your surroundings. So it's more like a way of life, meditation, than just simply doing scientific activity. So any questions, any comments, any reflections?
It's really a question about the cards, but like, he doesn't doubt that he's thinking, but like, I just thought that like, why does he not like doubt his own language? Because I mean, like thought is language, yeah. I thought like there could be like a possibility of like, I don't know, like thought is like really influenced by how like language is structured, and I don't know, I just thought that.
Okay, say more about that. What would be different without language or with another language?
So like, I don't know, like some languages like perceive the world differently, and like, so like Japanese, like many languages like have different like words, like, or like different perception of the world, and that could affect the way the person thinks. And so I don't know, like I may be like asking like completely off topic question, but like
no, it is on topic, and I'm curious what would that imply if you can, like, for example, like we are reading in English, it's actually written in French, so it's already a translation. But also, if in a different language we have a different perception of the world, what would that have changed with respect to Descartes' discourse? Would he trust his senses more, or would he dismiss mathematical proposition? What difference could that make? And I'm just not asking this in a confrontational manner. I'm asking it in a genuine way. Like, what difference would that make with respect to his thinking? I thought about that in a different way. I don't know whether it relates to what you are saying. Like, in Turkish, we don't have pronouns in sentences.
Yeah.
So I never say I think. I say düşünüyorum, which is the am at the end of the word that makes it that I'm doing it. So we never say I. Just like, since it is appropriate to make that. So we don't have gendered pronouns either. Like our pronoun, there's only one pronoun for everybody. So I always make the mistake of, like, terrible mistake of calling he, her, she, they. I mean, it's already very, like, sort of linguistically confusing to me, obviously. But obviously in the 21st century, it is complicated for other reasons too. But there's only O. That's a pronoun. Now, how does that shape my understanding of the world? I'm not going to go and say, oh, I don't see gender. That would be like silly thing to say. But we don't have gendered pronouns. Does that change my perception of the world different than yours? When I see a person, I don't identify gender. I'm sure I do. I'm sure I operate pretty much the same way other people, but I don't express it in the same way. And that's why I make mistakes all the time, linguistic mistakes, not sort of hopefully sort of gender-phobic mistakes, because that's not what I use. And that I don't say I don't say is, for example. Like in Turkish, you don't say the sky is blue, you say sky blue.
Yeah.
And so how would that change my process of thinking with respect to relying on my senses as opposed to mathematics?
Oh, okay. Sorry, like maybe my perception of, my understanding of like language was a little too vague.
It's not vague. It is. It's certainly worth thinking about. If we were operating in a different language, how would your thinking change? And as to whether that would make a difference for the class. I mean, to me, that I'm a little sort of convinced about this is because science, the language of science, has this claim of being universal. And it is the same in Japan and in Turkey and in the United States or in other parts of the world. So you do not contest, you contest the findings of science culturally. Like, it's not like that here, our environment is not like that, our economy is not like that, etc. But the method, I think the method is a universally communicable language, as far as I can see. Of course, I'm not an expert on this, but you don't go and study a different chemistry in New Zealand as opposed to Greece.
Yeah.
It's the same language, method. Yes, I mean, you express it in a different language, but E equals what? MC square or something. That's not like a culturally varying claim.
Okay. So it's not about a content, but it's about method. And
Exactly.
thinking is the method, and it's universal.
Yeah.
Whatever, like, languages speak, right?
Yes, and okay, so as an example, like if somebody from New Zealand, for example, came up with a drug against COVID, we wouldn't say, oh, that only works in New Zealand. And we wouldn't say that, oh, since it comes from New Zealand, it's not subject to the same scientific criteria as anything else. You cannot say, oh, you need to culturally respect their scientific method and take a poison, which is a medicine, blah, blah. So you question them in the same way. Did you have a control group? Did you have placebo? Did you follow these methods? Is it peer reviewed, whatever that means? Or is it like a scientifically acceptable experiment, regardless of where you are coming from? And we won't say, oh yeah, they don't do placebo in New Zealand very much, so that's a cultural thing. No, I mean, they have to for us to accept that as a method. I mean, at least science claims that. Science makes that universal claim that it is the same for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Or if there is a cultural variation in New Zealand that 2 + 2 is 6, then we'll have a real problem too. So all the calculations would be wrong from our perspective. Now, the interesting sort of conclusion from this is, though, human being, that we are sort of experiencing this, what I call schizophrenia phenomenologically in the world, but also conceptually, the I. What you believe to be the most unique among 7.8 billion people in the world, your I, your being, is also, in terms of its content, the most universal that actually applies to everybody. So there are 7.8 people who think the same thing, of thinking that they are thinking different things. And as we push for this individuality and glorify our uniqueness, we are actually at the same time making human communication all the more difficult. So why is it so unacceptable for me to say, I'm just standard? I'm just like everybody else in so many respects. I'm painfully ordinary. I think what most people think, or many people think, let's say. But what we are searching is, what is distinctive about me? What is my contribution? What is me as an individual? And that's expressed as I, which you relate to yourself in terms of your unique I, but it is also everybody. That might actually be a more culturally determined perception of yourself than just being, I'm just a point in a web of relations of many other people that are my family, my relatives, my friends, my community, and it's completely irrelevant who I am. That might be more cultural, I think.
I was wondering if, because I imagine there's different translations, or are there? And if so, is there a variation in just what is that like with this?
Well, I mean, my French is very basic and rudimentary, of not even like enough for research very well. But Descartes has been around for, like, as a books for 400 years. There are various translations, and a lot of scholars worked on various nuances of the translations. There is a standard language, so nobody writes, I think therefore I fly, or something like that. So there is really no sort of variations in cogito ergo sum. Like when he writes in Latin, that's almost a more sort of codified language. It's not even spoken anymore, so it's not like doesn't change very much. So I trust the translation maybe more than I should. But if you are interested in, if you know French, if you want to read in French or Latin, so you can do that. But the medium of instruction at Earlham College is English. So, I mean, at least in not in languages, but yeah, but in most other courses. Okay, so do you have enough ideas to carry on the paper and think about it, etc.? So I'm not really sure that we'll need the entire session on Thursday on Descartes, but that's your chance if you have questions. Usually, like when you ask me individual questions, which I answer and it's perfectly fine, but I always feel regret that you don't ask it in class so that other people can benefit from your question. So that's, you should do it for other people. So if you have a question, the chances are like there are other people who would either directly have that question or will certainly benefit from that question. So I would encourage you to also increase your participation grade to bring your questions to class. Okay, but in case we hit a wall on Thursday in terms of Descartes and you have no question, and I'll keep asking whether you have questions and you say no. You don't even say no, you just say nothing. So we'll start with Kant, Grounding for Metaphysics of Morals on Thursday. The first section is a little long. Well, not really. Okay, so it's only 17 pages. Read the preface. It's only 5 pages, but it's basically all definitions, etc. I'll go over that a little bit, but read the first section, the transition from the ordinary rational knowledge of morality to the philosophical. It starts out with goodwill, etc. We'll make a connection from Cartesian way of thinking to how Kant now thinks about moral philosophy and how we can act morally on the basis of that individualistic conception of ethics. So we'll move to Kant and we'll spend a week and a half or 2 weeks on Kant. But we can spend.
Please repeat what we have to read.
Excuse me?
Sorry, can you please repeat what we have to read on American Action Cup?
The first section up to page 17. For Kant. From page 1 to 17.
And you still want us to read Meditation 3?
Correct. That's really short. I mean, I don't know how much time we are going to spend on meditation because I already talked about it a little bit today. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pages. Okay, we might spend the whole time on meditation, but since you'll be working on your paper after Thursday, I would recommend that you read Kant now so that next week you'll have more time. Okay, any other questions? Any other comments? Okay, so I'm stopping the recording for now.